What's up guys, Nax Tech here, and in this video I'm going to be checking out the hardware differences between the iPad 4 on the left and the Nexus 10 on the right. So let's go ahead and talk about the thickness. The iPad 4 comes in at 9.4 millimeters thick versus the Nexus 10's 8.9 millimeters thick. So the Nexus 10 is thinner, and if we put it side by side here, I mean, it's not a lot of difference. And you won't really notice it in holding it. I can't notice it in holding it, but it is a thinner tablet. So yeah, let's just get these to go and rotate. And yeah, the weight. Now the weight is something you will notice. The iPad 4 comes in at 652 grams, whereas the Nexus 10 over here comes in at 603 grams. And while holding them, you can tell quite a big difference. The iPad 4 definitely weighs a lot more than the Nexus 10. You can definitely feel that when you hold them both. The Nexus 10, you can feel, it's quite light in general, whereas the iPad definitely has some weight. And I guess that's got to do with a few things, like probably the aluminium back and the more premium materials used on the iPad 4. Now let's go over to the big one, and this is the screen. The iPad has a 9.7-inch Retina display with the resolution of 2048 by 1536, 4x3-inch screen here, and it equals a pixel density of 264 ppi. Now over here you can see we're in portrait mode, and you can see the differences. This is a 16 by 9 or 16 by 10-inch screen, and you can see basically it's not that great using it in portrait. You much prefer it using it like that. So just take that into account. But let's talk about the resolution. It's a 10.1-inch screen, so it's bigger, and the resolution is 1260 by 1600. So yes, this Nexus 10 beats the iPad's resolution, or the amazing Retina display is no longer the highest resolution tablet in the world. And probably more importantly, the Nexus 10 has a pixel density of just under 300 at 299 ppi. I don't know how much that's actually going to make a difference, but it's higher. It's got a higher resolution and a higher ppi, so realistically this is going to be a better screen, but we'll see how the colors reproduce in a different test. Let's go ahead and talk about storage. The iPad 4 comes in 16, 32 and 64 with 1 GB of RAM. The Nexus 10 comes in only 16 and 32, but comes with 2 GB of RAM. So we should have a lot better multitasking here on the Nexus 10, and in general, just because it runs Android and it has true multitasking. Now both come with front-facing cameras. That's the one on the Nexus 10 there, and that's the one on the iPad. The front camera on the iPad is a 1.2 megapixel camera, and the front-facing camera on the Nexus 10 is a 1.9 megapixel camera. So higher megapixels over here on the Nexus 10. The rear cameras are both 5 megapixels, so I won't really talk about that. Now, where it gets really interesting as well is under the hood. The iPad 4, they're running the A6X processor with the PowerVR SGX 554 MP4 GPU, which is a quad-core GPU. And over here we're running, a dual core as well, but it's at 1.7 gigahertz. I didn't actually mention that, did I? Over here is a dual core 1.4 gigahertz. So 1.4 gigahertz versus a dual core 1.7 gigahertz. And the Mali T604 GPU in here. I'll talk more about the CPU and GPU, and we'll do benchmarks to compare the differences. But so far, all we know is the Nexus 10 does have a higher clock rate than the Apple A6X in terms of CPU. So we'll go ahead and check that out in a benchmark video a bit later on. Talking about battery, the iPad 4 has an 11,560 milliamp hour battery, whereas the Nexus 10 only has a 9,000 milliamp hour battery. Now, the iPad 4 definitely has a much bigger battery, and it's going to impact battery life. Over here, we've got a higher resolution display and only a 9,000 milliamp hour battery. So it's pretty safe to say you're going to get better battery life on the iPad 4 than the Nexus 10. but I haven't had the iPad for long enough to actually test that, although this came with 90% and it's only dropped down to 77, and I have been doing stuff like games and all that stuff. So yeah, talking about the price between these two devices. Now this is where, again, there is quite a big difference. If you look at this model here, this is a 16 gigabyte Wi-Fi model and without any data, and this again is the 16 gigabyte model without any data. You can't get data on the Nexus 10 yet. I don't know if they'll release firmware as you can on the iPad 4. The price of the iPad 4 16 gigabyte model is $399, whereas the Nexus 10 16 gigabyte model is $319 from the Play Store. And the 32 gigabyte model of the Nexus 10 is $389, whereas the 32 gigabyte model of the iPad is $479. So quite a big difference in terms of prices. You are paying for that kind of Apple brand and, you know, that Apple brand recognition that everyone seems to love. Now, in terms of the two tablets, the way they feel, I got to say, I mean, the weight makes a big difference. It's much nicer to hold the Nexus 10, I think. What feels better in your hand? I mean, this is going to come down to just your taste. For me, and I'm not a fanboy, before anyone says anything, I prefer this. And the reason I prefer this is because of the plastic back. It doesn't feel like it's going to slip out your hand. You can easily hold it in one hand comfortably. It doesn't feel like it's going to slip. The back is really nice. You can see the Nexus branding there, and you can see the smudgy back. It is very smudgy, but it is very nice to touch and the grip. Also, by the way, there is a flash on the Nexus 10, whereas on the iPad, not that it matters, there isn't a flash, just for your information there. So in terms of pure specs for price, I'm going to go ahead and say the Nexus 10, you're getting more. You're getting more stuff, you know. You're getting a high resolution screen, more PPI, more RAM, a bigger screen, probably a better aspect ratio, but again, that's down to you. A better front-facing camera. You're not getting as much battery life and stuff like that, but you know, really, it's going to come down to whether or not you're going to want the Android-based tablet or the iOS-based tablet. Depends what you bought into already. You know, you're not going to go ahead and want to spend all the same money on the games you bought on the iPad that you want to buy on Android. You know, it's annoying. So anyway, I don't want to get into all of that because this is just meant to be a hardware review. But yeah, guys, that's the hardware for these two tablets.